My hand was shaking, but I kept my voice steady, a trick I'd mastered over 2 decades of being the designated adult in a family of emotional toddlers. My partner, Liam, squeezed my other hand under the splintery picnic table, his thumb rubbing slow, reassuring circles over my knuckles. "We have some news," I said, my voice cutting through the sizzle of the grill and my brother's loud, obnoxious laughter. The whole backyard went quiet. My dad paused with a half-flipped burger patty dripping grease onto the coals. My sister, Chloe, the eternal golden child, lowered her rosé with a bored sigh. And my mom. My mom fixed me with a look. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't joy. It was cold, hard calculation. "I'm pregnant," I said, forcing a smile. Her response wasn't a shout. It was worse. A quiet, venomous whisper that somehow everyone heard. Well, I guess the free ride is officially over. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. To understand why a mother would say that to her daughter, you have to understand my family's very particular brand of currency. It wasn't money, not really, though that was certainly part of it. The real currency was obligation. Every favor, every kindness, every bit of emotional support was an investment my parents made, expecting a hefty return. I was their blue chip stock, the reliable one, Vanessa. I was the one who co-signed for my dad's disastrous business loan at 22, because family helps family. I was the one who drove Chloe to every single one of her emergency vet appointments for her perfectly healthy, designer-bred Pomeranian, because she was too anxious to handle the freeway. I was the one who organized my parents' anniversary parties, managed their bill payments when they got overwhelmed, and edited every single one of my dad's rambling, typo-filled emails to the city council about his neighbor's unregulated shrubbery. For years, I did it all with a smile, or at least a tight-lipped grimace that passed for one. I told myself it was just what you do. You keep the peace. You're the strong one. It's a narrative you can live with for a surprisingly long time, especially when everyone around you is constantly reinforcing it. "What would we do without you, Vanessa?" My mum would sigh, patting my arm before handing me another stack of paperwork to sort. It was a compliment that felt suspiciously like a chain. Liam saw it from the very beginning. When we first started dating, he'd come to family dinners and watch the spectacle with a kind of fascinated horror. He was an anthropologist studying a lost tribe with bafflingly self-destructive customs. "It's like you're the parent, and they're all your spoiled children," he'd said one night on the drive home. After I'd spent 3 hours helping my dad assemble a flat-pack bookshelf that he'd bought with money I'd loaned him, I'd laughed it off, a little too defensively. "That's just how they are," I'd said. But the words stuck, a little splinter in my mind. He was right. I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was a resource, a human utility service, and I was about to find out what happens when the service is interrupted. The BBQ wasn't just a casual get-together. It was the annual Vanessa Appreciation Day, as my dad jokingly called it, which was his deeply ironic way of framing the one day a year I hosted everyone at my house, did all the cooking, and provided all the booze, so they could relax. It was on my turf, in my home, that I decided to finally announce that my life was about to become my own. I thought, naively, that the news of a grandchild would be a great equalizer, a joy so pure it could cut through the dense fog of dysfunction. I really, truly believed that. I've never been more wrong. The years leading up to that moment were a masterclass in what I now call weaponized incompetence. My sister, Chloe, was the artist. She couldn't possibly be expected to understand things like credit scores or car insurance. She was a free spirit, which was my family's code for chronically unemployed and financially irresponsible. When she was 24, she decided she wanted to be a jewelry maker. My parents, who had always claimed to be struggling, somehow produced $5,000 for her to buy beads and silver wire. She made 3 lopsided necklaces, and then abandoned the entire venture when she discovered it was, actual work. The box of expensive supplies still sits in their garage, a monument to a fleeting whim. Meanwhile, I, who had worked part-time all through college to graduate with zero debt, was asked to help out with the rent on the trendy loft apartment they'd co-signed for her. Just for a few months, until she gets on her feet, my mum had said. Those few months stretched into 2 years. I remember once, I gently suggested to Chloe that maybe she could get a part-time job at the coffee shop down the street. The look of pure, unadulterated horror on her face was something to behold. A job? Vanessa, I'm curating my brand. She said this with a completely straight face, while wearing mismatched socks and eating cereal for dinner. My dad was no better. His great passion was inventing. He was always on the verge of a breakthrough that would change the world and make us all rich. There was the Sock Sorter 2000, a contraption made of cardboard tubes and a leaf blower that just shot socks into the ceiling fan. There was the self-weeding garden hose, which was just a regular hose he'd poked holes in. Each failed invention was followed by a period of deep, dramatic melancholy, where he'd sigh about the cruelty of the patent office and the world's lack of vision. And I, the ever-reliable daughter, would be the one to sit with him, listen to his rants, and quietly pay the credit card bill he'd run up at the hardware store. Liam called it the tragic genius routine. He gets to have all the fun of dreaming, and you get to handle the boring reality of the consequences, he'd observed, hitting the nail so squarely on the head it hurt. My role was to be the anchor, the sensible one, the one who kept the family ship from sinking under the combined weight of their whimsy and irresponsibility. And for my troubles, I was rewarded with the title of the strong one. "You're so capable, Vanessa," my mum would say, her voice full of a strange, almost resentful admiration. "Chloe is so fragile, she needs our help. But you've always been a rock." It took me years to realise that strong was just another word for useful, and fragile was a get-out-of-jail-free card. The decision to get pregnant was a quiet rebellion. Liam and I had been together for 5 years, and we'd built a life for ourselves that felt like a separate continent from the chaotic island of my family. We had a small house with a garden, stable jobs we didn't hate, and a shared sense of calm that felt like a miracle. We talked about having a baby not as an obligation or an expectation, but as something we wanted for us, a new chapter that would be entirely our own. I knew, of course, that my family would have opinions. My mother had been dropping hints for years, not so subtle comments about her friends' grandchildren and the ticking of my biological clock, but her hints were always framed in a way that made it about her. "I'm not getting any younger, Vanessa," she'd say, as if my uterus was a retirement fund she was waiting to cash in. I dreaded telling them, not because I was afraid of their disapproval, but because I was afraid of their approval. I knew they would see this baby as a new project, a new toy, a new person to absorb into the family vortex. Chloe would see a built-in babysitter for her future, hypothetical children, the ones she'd have when she finally found a man who understood her spirit. My dad would see a tiny, captive audience for his inventions. And my mum would see a do-over, a chance to have the kind of relationship with my child that she'd never quite managed to have with me, one based on adoration and indulgence rather than expectation and service. Liam, in his infinite wisdom, suggested we set some ground rules before we even told them. "We need to be a team," he said, taking my hands in his. "United front. No is a complete sentence. We decide who visits, when, and for how long. This is our family, Vanessa. Ours." The words were like a life raft. We rehearsed it, like a play. We practiced saying no. "No, you can't just drop by unannounced. No, we're not naming him after my grandfather. No, Chloe, you cannot borrow the baby for a photo shoot for your brand." It felt ridiculous, but it was necessary. We were preparing for a siege. The day of the BBQ, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. I'd spent the morning making my famous potato salad, the one my dad always devoured, and a lemon tart that was Chloe's favourite. A part of me, the old Vanessa, was still trying to please them, to soften the blow of my impending independence with carbs and sugar. As guests, my family, started to arrive, the old dynamics clicked into place, like a well-worn cassette. My dad immediately started complaining about the traffic. Chloe swept in, kissed me on the cheek, and handed me a bottle of wine with the price tag still on it. "For the hostess," she'd chirped, before immediately asking Liam to open it for her. My mum surveyed my backyard, her eyes scanning for imperfections. "The hydrangeas are looking a little droopy, honey," she'd noted, her first words to me all day. I just smiled. A brittle, fragile thing. "They'll be fine, Mom." The whole afternoon felt like the deep breath before a plunge into icy water. And then, it was time. The silence that followed my mum's pronouncement was thick and suffocating. It was broken by the sound of a plastic fork clattering onto a paper plate. My dad, ever the conflict avoider, suddenly became intensely interested in a patch of grass by his feet. Chloe's jaw was literally hanging open, her glass of rosé frozen halfway to her lips. It was a perfect tableau of shock. But it was Liam who moved first. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the patio stones. He didn't say a word to my mother. He didn't even look at her. He just looked at me, his eyes full of a fierce, protective fire. "I think we're done here," he said, his voice low and steady. He pulled me gently to my feet, and it was like a spell had been broken. The paralysis that had seized me shattered, replaced by a wave of cold, clarifying rage. My mother finally seemed to realize what she'd said. Her face, which had been a mask of smug satisfaction, crumpled into a caricature of bewildered innocence. "Oh, honey, I was just joking," she said, her voice a high-pitched, unconvincing trill. "A little joke. You know me." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time, without the filter of daughterly obligation. I saw a woman who was terrified, not for me, not for the baby, but for herself. She had just watched her greatest asset declare its independence, and in a moment of pure, panicked selfishness, she had tried to devalue it. "A joke?" I repeated, and my own voice sounded foreign to me, stripped of its usual placating tone. "What part of that was a joke, Mom? The part where you called my child a burden, or the part where you implied that my entire life has been a transaction?" My dad finally looked up, his face pale. "Now, Vanessa, let's not overreact. Your mother has a strange sense of humor." "No," I said, turning my gaze on him. "I'm not overreacting. I'm finally reacting. For 25 years, I have been this family's shock absorber. I have bailed you out, propped you up, and cleaned up your messes, and I have never asked for anything in return. And the one single time, I have a piece of good news that is entirely my own. This is the reaction I get." I looked at Chloe, who was now staring at her phone, pretending to be engrossed in something, anything else. "And you," I said. "Not a word. Of course not. Why would you defend me? The gravy train might get derailed." She flinched, looking up with wide, wounded eyes. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You'll have to forgive me if my sense of fairness is a little skewed right now." I turned back to my mother. "The free ride is over," I said, repeating her words back to her. "You're right about that, but it was never mine. It was always yours." Liam put his arm around me, a solid, grounding weight. "We're leaving," he said to the stunned audience. And we did. We walked through my house, past the half-eaten food and the cheap bottle of wine, and we got in our car and drove away. I didn't look back. In the rearview mirror, I could see them standing frozen on the patio, 3 statues in a garden of their own making. The immediate aftermath was a flurry of text messages and voicemails, each one a masterclass in manipulation. My dad went for the guilt trip. "Vanessa, you broke your mother's heart. She hasn't stopped crying. You know she didn't mean it. She loves you." Love. That word again. In my family, love was a currency used to buy compliance. Chloe tried a different tactic. Righteous indignation on my mother's behalf. "I can't believe you would speak to Mum that way. She does everything for this family. You were so cruel. Everything for this family." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. What, exactly, did she do? She delegated. She outsourced her emotional and practical labor to me. My mother's attempts were the most pathetic. She sent a string of texts that swung wildly between feigned remorse and passive-aggressive jabs. "I'm so sorry if my silly joke was misinterpreted. I'm just so excited to be a grandma." Followed an hour later by, "I guess I'll just have to get used to being the villain in your story." Liam became my official bouncer. He read every message and gave me the sanitized summary. "Your dad is laying it on thick. Your sister is auditioning for a melodrama. Your mum is trying to gaslight you via text. Anything you want me to reply?" "No," I said, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. "Nothing at all." We blocked their numbers. All of them. It felt like cutting off a limb, but I knew it was a limb that had been gangrenous for years. The silence was jarring at first. I kept expecting the phone to ring, to see a familiar name pop up on the screen. The habit of being on call was deeply ingrained. But as the days turned into a week, the silence started to feel like peace. I could make a cup of tea without my phone buzzing with a manufactured crisis. Liam and I could have dinner without the conversation inevitably turning to my family's latest drama. We were in our own little bubble, and it was glorious. About 2 weeks after the BBQ, a package arrived. It was a large, elaborately wrapped box with a card tucked under the ribbon. It was from my mother. My first instinct was to throw it away. Liam, ever the voice of reason, suggested we open it. "Maybe it's a real apology," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it for a second. Inside the box was a mountain of baby stuff. Expensive, brand-name onesies, a silver rattle from Tiffany's, a cashmere blanket. It was an obscene amount of stuff, a desperate, clumsy attempt to buy her way back into my good graces. The card was the real kicker. It wasn't an apology. It was a statement. "For my grandbaby," it read, in my mother's looping, dramatic script. "Because family is the most important thing, and I will not let your stubbornness stand in the way of me being in this child's life." It wasn't a peace offering. It was a declaration of war. She wasn't sorry for what she said. She was sorry she got caught. She was sorry there were consequences. And she was making it very clear that she intended to bypass me entirely and stake her claim on my child. I looked at the pile of expensive gifts, and I didn't feel gratitude. I felt sick. It was the same old pattern, just with a higher price tag. She wasn't trying to fix the relationship. She was trying to purchase a new one. Liam and I packed every single item back into the box. The Tiffany rattle felt cold and heavy in my hand, like a tiny silver shackle. We drove to the post office and sent it back, returned to sender. I didn't include a note. The empty box was the note. That, I think, was the moment my mother realized that her usual tactics weren't going to work. The money, the guilt, the emotional blackmail, it was all useless against the one thing she had never encountered from me before. A firm, unyielding boundary. Her next move was to deploy the flying monkeys. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly started calling. The script was always the same. "I heard there was some misunderstanding," they'd begin, their voices oozing with false concern. "Your mother is just devastated. You know how she is. You're the strong one, Vanessa. You should be the bigger person." It was infuriating. They had no idea what had actually happened, of course. They had only heard my mother's heavily edited, tear-soaked version of events, in which I was the ungrateful, cruel daughter who had viciously attacked her for a harmless little joke. Being the bigger person in my family meant quietly accepting the abuse. It meant swallowing your own pain to make everyone else comfortable. It meant setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. I was done with being the bigger person. I started responding with the unvarnished truth. She told me my pregnancy meant the free ride was over, I'd say, my voice calm and flat. She didn't apologize. She tried to buy my forgiveness with expensive gifts. There is no misunderstanding. The conversations usually ended pretty quickly after that. The truth was a bucket of cold water on their well-intentioned, but ultimately enabling, crusade. The most surprising betrayal came from my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. We had always been close, or so I thought. She was the cool aunt, the one who would slip me $20 on my birthday and tell me stories about my mum when she was young. She called me one afternoon, and for a moment, I thought it would be different. "I talked to your mother," she said, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "She's a mess." "I'm sure she is," I said carefully. "Vanessa, honey," she sighed. "Couldn't you just apologize? Just to smooth things over. It doesn't have to be a big deal. Just say you're sorry for the scene, and we can all move on. For the baby." I felt something inside me snap. "Apologize?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Aunt Carol, why would I apologize for her behavior?" "Because that's what family does," she said, her voice rising. "You suck it up. You think your grandmother never said horrible things to me and your mother? You think we didn't have to bite our tongues 1,000 times? You kids today, you're so sensitive. You think everything has to be perfect." And there it was, the generational trauma, laid bare. She wasn't defending my mother, she was defending the system. The unspoken rule that women in our family were meant to absorb pain, to be the emotional dumping ground for everyone else, and to do it with a smile. She was angry at me not for hurting my mother, but for breaking the rules, for refusing to play the game. "That's a horrible way to live," I said softly. "And I'm not doing it, not anymore. I'm not going to teach my child that love means letting people hurt you." I ended the call, my heart pounding. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but it was also the most liberating. I was not just ending a cycle for myself. I was ending it for the little person growing inside me. The next few months were a strange, quiet paradise. My pregnancy progressed peacefully. Liam and I went to all the appointments together. We painted the nursery a soft, sunny yellow, and we spent our weekends taking long walks and talking about everything and nothing. It was the first time in my adult life that my world felt truly my own, not a satellite orbiting the chaotic sun of my family. I didn't hear from them directly, but I got updates through the grapevine. Chloe, apparently, had been forced to get a part-time job. The bank of Vanessa was permanently closed, and the bank of Mom and Dad had apparently followed suit, likely out of spite towards me. She was working as a hostess at a restaurant, and according to my cousin, was complaining bitterly about the injustice of it all. My dad had started a new invention, something to do with composting, but without me to fund his trips to the hardware store or listen to his 4-hour monologues. His enthusiasm was apparently waning. And my mother had doubled down. She had created a public-facing persona of the doting, excited grandmother-to-be. She posted sonogram pictures on her Facebook page, pictures she had stolen from my social media, which I had foolishly left public. She wrote long, saccharine posts about her precious grandbaby and how she couldn't wait to meet them. She was curating a narrative, building a fantasy world where she was the central, loving matriarch. It was a performance for her friends, a way to save face and paint me as the villain who was cruelly keeping her from her grandchild. Liam was livid. He wanted to report the pictures, to publicly call her out on her lies, but I stopped him. "It doesn't matter," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. "Let her play her games. We know the truth. Anyone who matters knows the truth." Her online performance was a hollow, pathetic thing, and it had no power over me anymore. The real test came when the baby shower invitations went out. My best friend, Sarah, who had been my staunchest defender through all of this, had organised it. We had a long discussion about who to invite. "Do you want to invite any of them?" she'd asked gently. "Your aunt?" "Chloe." I thought about it for a long time. A part of me, the old, peacekeeping Vanessa, wanted to extend an olive branch, to show that I was capable of forgiveness. But then I thought about what that would mean. It would mean opening the door, even a crack, to the chaos. It would mean subjecting my friends, my real family, to their drama. It would mean my baby shower wouldn't be a celebration of new life, but a tense, awkward hostage negotiation. "No," I said finally. "No one. This day is about the baby. It's about joy. It's about peace. They are the opposite of all of those things." So, we sent the invitations out to our chosen family, our close friends, Liam's wonderful, sane parents, his siblings. It was a small, carefully curated list of people who had shown us nothing but genuine love and support. Of course, my mother found out. She must have seen a post or heard about it from a distant relative. The day of the shower, as we were setting up decorations and arranging tiny, adorable animal-themed cupcakes, a delivery van pulled up. It was a flower arrangement so massive it barely fit through the door. It was a monstrosity of lilies and roses, a funereal, ostentatious display that screamed, "Look at me." The card was short and to the point. "Thinking of you on this special day. So sad to be missing it. Love, Mom." It was a power move, a way to insert herself into the celebration, to cast a shadow over our joy. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide. "What do you want to do with it?" she asked. The old Vanessa would have put it in a place of honor, a testament to my mother's love. The new Vanessa had a much better idea. "Take it apart," I said with a grin. Sarah looked confused for a second, then her face broke into a matching smile. "I love it," she said. We spent the next 20 minutes gleefully dismantling the floral beast. We took the individual roses and lilies and put them in small bud vases all around the house. We gave a few to each guest as they arrived. We turned my mother's passive-aggressive Trojan horse into a beautiful, shared celebration. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. The shower itself was perfect. It was full of laughter, terrible baby-themed games, and genuine, uncomplicated happiness. Liam's mom gave me a beautiful, hand-knitted blanket. My friends pooled their money to buy us the stroller we'd been saving for. Sarah gave a toast that made me cry, all about our long friendship and how she knew I was going to be the most incredible mother. There was no drama, no tension, no one looking at me with calculating eyes. It was just love. Real love, not the transactional, conditional thing my family called love. As I sat there, surrounded by people who truly cared for me, I realized how starved I had been for this. I had spent so many years accepting crumbs of affection that I had forgotten what a real feast felt like. The contrast was so stark it was almost painful. For years, I had believed that my family, with all its flaws, was the only family I had. I had believed that I had to accept their toxicity because that was the price of admission. But I was wrong. I had built a family, a better one based on respect, kindness, and mutual support. Liam and I had done that. We had created a sanctuary. The birth of our son, Oliver, a few weeks later, only solidified this feeling. Holding him in my arms for the first time, I felt a wave of love so fierce and protective it took my breath away. And in that moment, I made a silent promise to him. I would never let anyone make him feel the way my family had made me feel. I would never make him feel like he was a resource to be exploited or a burden to be resented. He would be loved for exactly who he was, unconditionally. He would be my son, not my project. He would be my joy, not my obligation. The first week of his life was a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. We were in our own little newborn bubble, and the outside world ceased to exist. And then, of course, my family tried to pop it. A letter arrived, addressed to me in my father's familiar, spidery handwriting. It was thick, and I knew it wasn't a simple congratulations card. My hand trembled as I opened it. Liam watched me, his expression wary. "You don't have to read that," he said softly, but I had to. I had to know what their next move was. The letter was not what I expected. It was a formal-looking document, printed on heavy paper. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Grandparents' rights, a formal petition." I read the words again. Sure, I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation. Grandparents' rights, a formal petition. It wasn't a legal document, not a real one. It was something my father had typed up, a pathetic attempt to intimidate me with official-looking fonts and serious-sounding words. The petition was a long, rambling manifesto, a greatest hits of their grievances and self-pity. It talked about the natural, God-given right of a grandparent to have a relationship with their grandchild. It accused me of parental alienation and emotional cruelty. It painted them as the loving, devoted victims, and me as the cold, vindictive gatekeeper. It detailed all the things they had done for me over the years: the roof over my head as a child, the endless support for my education, conveniently omitting the fact that I had worked to pay for most of it, the love and guidance they had so generously provided. It was a work of fiction so audacious it was almost impressive. Attached to the petition was a list of demands. They wanted a fixed visitation schedule, every other weekend, and alternating holidays. They wanted to be included in all major decisions regarding Oliver's upbringing, from his schooling to his religion. They wanted the right to take him on vacations, alone. They had even, and this was the part that made me laugh out loud, included a clause that I was not to speak ill of them in Oliver's presence. It was a contract for a relationship, a business proposal for a family. They had completely bypassed the human element, the hurt, the apology, the reconciliation, and gone straight to a legalistic, transactional framework. It was the only way they knew how to operate. Liam read it over my shoulder, his face getting darker with every sentence. "They're insane," he breathed. "They are actually certifiably insane." "They're desperate," I said, a strange sense of calm settling over me. "This isn't a power move. This is a Hail Mary." They had tried everything else. The guilt, the gifts, the silent treatment, the flying monkeys. Nothing had worked. So now they were resorting to this, a homemade legal threat. They had so fundamentally misunderstood the situation, so completely failed to grasp the nature of the wound, that they thought the solution was a contract. They thought they could force me to give them what they wanted. I folded the letter and put it on the coffee table. I looked at Liam, at the fierce love in his eyes. I looked at the bassinet, where our son was sleeping, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. Everything was so clear. "I'm calling a lawyer," I said. "A real one." The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, listened to my story without interruption. I laid it all out: the years of financial and emotional exploitation, the incident at the BBQ, the harassment, the stolen photos, and finally, the ridiculous petition. I felt a little foolish even showing it to her, this homemade document of delusion. But she took it very seriously. She read it carefully, her expression unreadable. When she was done, she took off her glasses and looked at me. "First of all," she said, her voice kind but firm, "this document is legally meaningless. It's a scare tactic, and a poorly executed one at that. In this state, grandparents have to prove that a relationship with them is in the best interest of the child, and that denying that relationship would cause the child actual harm. Given their behaviour, they would have an impossible time proving that." A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful, it almost made me dizzy. "So they have no case?" "They have no case," she confirmed. "But that doesn't mean they won't try to make your life difficult. People like this, they thrive on drama. They might try to file a real petition, just to drag you through the mud and force you to spend money on legal fees." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "So, we are going to cut them off at the knees. We are going to send them a cease and desist letter. It will state, in no uncertain terms, that they are to have no further contact with you, your partner, or your child. No calls, no texts, no letters, no packages, no unannounced visits. Any attempt to contact you will be considered harassment. It will also state that any further use of your child's image without your express written consent will be met with legal action. We will send it via certified mail, so we have proof they received it." It was more than I had hoped for. It was a shield, a legal ironclad boundary that they would not be able to cross. "Do it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Do it." Sending that letter was a declaration that the war was over, because I was refusing to fight. I was not engaging. I was not negotiating. I was simply stopping. The letter went out the next day. We got the signed receipt back a few days later. And then, silence. A deep, profound, and utterly blissful silence. The text stopped, the calls stopped, the packages stopped. It was like a noisy, malfunctioning machine had finally been unplugged. The first few weeks of the silence were strange. I kept bracing for impact, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'd see a car that looked like my dad's, and my heart would leap into my throat. I'd hear the mail slot and feel a jolt of anxiety. The trauma was still there, a phantom limb that ached with the memory of pain. But as time went on, the anxiety began to fade. It was replaced by a sense of security I had never known. I could walk to my mailbox without fear. I could post a picture of Oliver on my private social media without worrying about it being stolen. I was free. We settled into our new life as a family of 3. It was messy and chaotic and beautiful. Oliver grew, developing a personality that was all his own. He was a happy, easygoing baby, and I often wondered if that was because he was being raised in an environment of peace, an environment free from the toxic stress that had defined my own childhood. We had created a different world for him, and that was the greatest gift I could ever give him. About a year after Oliver was born, we ran into Chloe. It was inevitable, I suppose, in a city of our size. We were at the farmer's market on a sunny Saturday morning. Liam was carrying Oliver in a baby carrier, and I was trying to decide between heirloom tomatoes and kale. I looked up, and there she was, standing a few feet away, staring at us. She looked different, thinner, and tired. The curated brand of the free-spirited artist had been replaced by the weary look of someone who actually had to work for a living. Her eyes were fixed on Oliver, a hungry, desperate look in them that made my blood run cold. She took a step towards us, and I instinctively moved to stand in front of Liam and the baby. "Vanessa," she said, her voice raspy. He's beautiful." "Yes, he is," I said, my voice polite but distant. I made no move to let her closer. An awkward silence stretched between us. She kept looking at Oliver, then back at my face, as if searching for something. "I miss you," she said finally, the words sounding rusty, unused. "I miss you too," I found myself saying, and it was true. I missed the idea of her. I missed the sister she could have been, the one I had glimpses of in our childhood before the family roles became so rigidly defined. I did not miss the entitled, manipulative person she had become. "Mom and Dad, they're not doing so great," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Dad's given up on the inventing. He just watches TV all day. And Mom, she just cries a lot. She's aged, like, 10 years. It was a classic move, the appeal to pity. The attempt to make me feel responsible for their misery. The old Vanessa would have crumbled. The old Vanessa would have felt a surge of guilt, a desperate need to fix it, to make it all better. But the new Vanessa just felt a profound sense of sadness. Not for them, but for the whole, sorry situation. "That's a shame," I said. And the words were utterly inadequate. But they were the only ones I had. "Chloe, we have to go." I started to walk away, but she reached out and grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Can I just hold him? For a second," she pleaded, her eyes welling up with tears. "Please, Vanessa, he's my nephew." I looked down at her hand on my arm, and then back up at her face. I saw the desperation there, but I also saw the same old selfishness. She wasn't asking for my forgiveness. She wasn't acknowledging the pain she had caused. She was asking for access. Access to my son, the one thing she thought could fix the gaping hole in her own life. I gently removed her hand from my arm. "No, Chloe," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. "You can't." The hurt on her face was real. But it was the hurt of a child being denied a toy, not the hurt of a woman reckoning with the consequences of her actions. We walked away, leaving her standing alone among the stalls of organic vegetables and artisanal cheeses. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired, and incredibly, deeply grateful for the life I had built, a life where I was finally, blessedly, in charge. The encounter with Chloe was a stark reminder of the world I had escaped, but it didn't destabilize me. If anything, it reinforced my decision. It was proof that nothing had changed. They were still stuck in the same toxic patterns, still waiting for me to come back and resume my role as the family's emotional caretaker. A few months later, Liam's parents threw a big party for their 40th wedding anniversary. It was a beautiful event, held in a botanical garden, with fairy lights strung through the trees. It was everything my own family's gatherings were not: relaxed, joyful, and filled with people who genuinely seemed to like each other. As I watched Liam's dad give a heartfelt, funny speech about his wife, I felt a familiar pang of sadness for what I'd never had. But it was a gentle sadness now, not the sharp, tearing grief it used to be. It was the feeling of acknowledging a scar, not of being newly wounded. Later in the evening, Liam's mum, a warm, wonderful woman named Eleanor, pulled me aside. She had a glass of champagne in one hand and a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "I have some gossip," she said, leaning in, "and I think you'll appreciate it." My interest was piqued. Eleanor was not a gossip, so this had to be good. "My friend Margaret," she began, "plays bridge with your Aunt Carol." I braced myself. "Oh? Apparently," Eleanor continued, her voice low, "your mother tried to crash a baby shower last month." I must have looked confused. "Whose baby shower?" "Exactly," Eleanor grinned. "Some distant cousin of yours. Your mother heard about it, assumed she was invited because she's the matriarch, and just showed up with a gift and everything. The poor girl, the new mum, had to ask her to leave." I stared at her, speechless, then burst out laughing, a loud, uninhibited laugh that turned a few heads. The image was just too perfect. My mother, in her finest outfit, with a carefully selected, passive-aggressive gift, being politely but firmly shown the door. It was the universe delivering a dose of karma so specific, so perfectly tailored to her particular brand of narcissism, that it was almost poetic. "She's become the family story," Eleanor said, sipping her champagne. "The crazy, overbearing grandmother that no one wants at their parties. She tried so hard to make you the villain, and in the end, she played herself." It was a strange feeling, hearing this. It wasn't vindictive pleasure, not exactly. It was more like validation. The quiet, profound relief of being seen. The world had not, in fact, gone crazy. My perception of reality had been accurate all along. She was exactly who I thought she was, and now, other people were seeing it too. The narrative she had tried so desperately to control had slipped from her grasp. I was no longer the difficult one. I was the one who had gotten away. The one who had broken the cycle. The rest of the evening passed in a happy haze. I danced with Liam. I watched our son get passed around and doted on by his loving, functional grandparents. And I felt a sense of peace that was deep and abiding. I had chosen my family, and I had chosen well. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place a few weeks before Oliver's 2nd birthday. I received an email from a name I didn't recognize. The subject line was simply, "Your father." My first instinct was to delete it. I had a strict no-contact policy, and that extended to third parties. But curiosity, that persistent, nagging human trait, got the better of me. I opened it. The email was from a man who introduced himself as a former colleague of my father's, from a short-lived office job he'd had years ago. The man, let's call him Frank, wrote that he had recently reconnected with my dad on social media and had been troubled by his posts. My father, it seemed, had taken to writing long, rambling essays about his stolen legacy and his brilliant inventions that the world was too foolish to appreciate. But more than that, he wrote about his family. He wrote about his beloved daughter, a fragile artist, Chloe, and his other daughter, May, the one who had betrayed them. Frank said he remembered me from company picnics. He remembered me as a bright, responsible teenager who was always helping my dad organize his notes or fetching him coffee. He said my father used to brag about me constantly, calling me his rock, his right-hand man. "He was so proud of you," Frank wrote. "He used to say you were the one who was going to do great things. He said you had a good head on your shoulders, unlike the rest of them." And then came the part that made my breath catch in my throat. "I'm writing to you because I saw him the other day," Frank continued. "He was at a coffee shop, and he was showing a young man, a kid really, some blueprints. He was giving him the whole world-changing invention speech, and then he asked the kid for money, $500, for a prototype. It was a scam, Vanessa. A sad, pathetic little con. The kid looked uncomfortable and made an excuse to leave. Your father just sat there, looking old and defeated. I don't know the whole story of what happened with your family, but I thought you should know. This isn't the man I remember. I closed the email and sat there for a long time, the words echoing in my head. It all made sense now. The inventions weren't just a hobby. They were a hustle. A long con he had been running on his own family for years. I had been his primary investor, his most reliable mark. My love and sense of duty had been the capital he'd used to fund his fantasies. The tragic genius routine wasn't just a personality quirk. It was a carefully constructed persona designed to elicit sympathy and money. And it had worked, for decades. He wasn't a dreamer. He was a grifter. And my mother was his accomplice, the one who ran interference and managed the PR, constantly reinforcing the narrative of his misunderstood brilliance and my unwavering strength. They were a team. A dysfunctional, codependent, emotional and financial Ponzi scheme. And I had just been the first, and biggest, investor to pull out. The revelation about my father didn't make me angry. It just made me sad. It was the final, pathetic chapter in a long, tragic story. The strong one, the rock, the responsible one. It had all been a role I was cast in, a part I played in their long-running theatrical production. My purpose was to be the stable ground on which they could build their castles in the sky. When I stopped playing my part, the whole show fell apart. The anger had burned out long ago, leaving behind a kind of weary clarity. I saw them now, not as monsters, but as two deeply broken people who had used their children to fill the empty spaces in their own lives. They had used Chloe as a doll, a pretty object to be admired and indulged. They had used me as a tool, a utility to be exploited. Neither of us had ever been seen as a person. We were just props in their drama. I thought about the petition they had sent, their demand for grandparents' rights. It was so clear now that it had nothing to do with Oliver. Oliver was just a new prop. He was their chance to start the show over with a new cast member. They wanted to be grandparents in the same way Chloe wanted to be a jewelry maker, or my dad wanted to be an inventor. It was a role they wanted to play, a costume they wanted to wear for the adoring audience of their friends and neighbours. It had nothing to do with the hard, unglamorous, day-to-day work of actually loving a child. That work, I was learning, was the most beautiful and rewarding work in the world. It was waking up at 3 a.m. to soothe a fever. It was reading the same board book 20 times in a row. It was cleaning up spilled milk and kissing scraped knees. It was 1,000 small, unseen acts of service, done not out of obligation, but out of a love so vast it felt like it could power the sun. It was everything my parents' version of love was not. Their love was a performance. My love for my son was a practice. On Oliver's 2nd birthday, we had a small party in our backyard, the same backyard where it had all imploded 2 years earlier. But now, it was a different space. It was filled with laughter and sunlight. Oliver, wearing a tiny party hat askew on his head, toddled around on the grass, his face smeared with chocolate cake. Liam's parents were there, beaming with pride. Our friends, our real family, were sitting at the same picnic table, their faces happy and relaxed. There were no ghosts. There was no tension. There was just peace. As I watched Liam push Oliver on the swing we'd hung from the old oak tree, I felt a sense of profound, quiet joy. I had done it. I had broken the cycle. I had walked through the fire and come out the other side, not unscathed, but whole. I had built a life for myself, for my son, that was safe and sane and filled with real, unconditional love. Life continued, as it does, in a rhythm of ordinary, beautiful days. Oliver started preschool. I got a promotion at work. Liam started coaching a kids' soccer team. We were a normal, boring, happy family, and it was everything I had ever wanted. The silence from my family was so complete that they started to feel like characters from a book I'd read a long time ago. Their power over me had vanished so completely, it was hard to remember a time when it had been all-consuming. Occasionally, a piece of news would filter through to me. I heard that Chloe had moved in with a new boyfriend, a man who, according to my cousin, seemed nice, but also paid for all her bills. The pattern, it seemed, was holding steady. I heard that my parents had downsized, selling the family home and moving into a small condo. The news gave me a brief jolt, a sense of an era officially ending, but it passed quickly. That house, which had once seemed like the center of my universe, was just a building. The memories it held were no longer mine to carry. The real test of my newfound peace came from an unexpected source. I was at the grocery store, juggling a full cart and a toddler who was demanding a candy bar, when I heard a voice say my name. "Vanessa, is that you?" I turned, and it took me a moment to place the woman. It was my mother's best friend, Brenda, a woman who had been a fixture of my childhood, a permanent presence at every holiday and birthday party. She looked older, her face etched with a permanent expression of worry. "Brenda," I said, forcing a polite smile. "It's been a long time." Her eyes immediately dropped to Oliver, who was now trying to climb out of the cart. "And this must be the little one," she said, her voice thick with a syrupy false sweetness. "Oh, he's just precious. He looks just like your mother." I stiffened. It was a calculated remark, a little verbal dart designed to remind me of my place, of my connection to the woman I had cut out of my life. "He looks like his father," I said, my voice cool. Brenda's smile faltered. She launched into the speech I knew was coming, the one she had probably been rehearsing. "Your mother misses you so much, Vanessa," she said, placing a hand on my arm. "She's not well. She's heartbroken. She talks about you and the baby all the time. She just wants to see him." I looked at her, at this woman who had watched me grow up, who had seen the dynamic, who had known exactly what my role in that family was. And she was choosing to be my mother's mouthpiece, to be an agent of the guilt machine. "Brenda," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "My mother knows how to contact me if she ever wants to offer a genuine, sincere apology for her behavior. Until then, there is nothing to discuss." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I simply stated a fact. It was a boundary, clear and clean. Brenda looked taken aback, as if she'd expected me to burst into tears and beg for forgiveness. She opened her mouth to say something else, probably another line from my mother's script, but I didn't give her the chance. "It was nice to see you," I said, turning my cart and walking away. I could feel her eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. In the car, Oliver finally got his candy bar and was happily chattering away in the back seat. My heart was beating a little faster than usual, but I wasn't upset. I felt strong, not the strong my family had always talked about, the strength of a pack mule that can carry an endless burden. This was a different kind of strength. It was the strength of knowing my own worth, the strength of refusing to be manipulated, the strength of protecting my peace and my child's peace. Above all else, it was the best kind of strength there is. A few months before Oliver's 3rd birthday, an official-looking envelope arrived in the mail. This one wasn't homemade. It was from a law firm. My heart did a familiar lurch, the muscle memory of anxiety kicking in before my rational brain could catch up. Liam saw my face as I stood in the hallway, staring at the return address. "What is it?" he asked, coming to stand beside me. I said, my voice a little shaky. "It's round 2. We opened it together. It was a formal notification that my parents had filed a petition for grandparent visitation rights in family court. Ms. Albright had been right. They were actually doing it. They were taking me to court. The document was filled with legal jargon, but the gist was the same as their homemade petition. It was a litany of lies and exaggerations, painting me as an unstable, vindictive daughter who was using her child as a pawn. It claimed they had a deep and loving bond with Oliver, a child they had never met. It claimed their absence was causing him irreparable harm. It was, from start to finish, a work of complete and utter fiction. My first reaction was a hot surge of fury. How dare they? How dare they try to force their way into our lives with lawyers and lies? How dare they subject us to this, drag our family through the court system, all to soothe their own bruised egos? But then, as Liam and I sat down and read it again, a different feeling emerged. It was so over the top, so transparently false, that it was almost comical. They had no evidence, no photos of them with Oliver, no witnesses to this supposed deep and loving bond. All they had were their own self-serving declarations. They're going to lose, Liam said with absolute certainty. They don't have a leg to stand on. I know, I said, but they're going to make it ugly. They're going to try to drag my name through the mud. Let them, he said, taking my hand. We have the truth. We have Ms. Albright. And we have something they'll never have. A happy, healthy, loving family. That's all the court is going to need to see. We met with Ms. Albright the next day. She was, as always, a beacon of calm competence. She read the petition, a small, wry smile playing on her lips. Well, she said, they've certainly committed to the narrative. She laid out the plan. We would file a response, denying all their claims. We would request that the court appoint a guardian ad litem, a neutral third party who would represent Oliver's best interests. We would gather our evidence, the petition they had sent, the cease and desist letter, statements from friends and Liam's family who had witnessed their behaviour and our stable home life. This is going to be an expensive and emotionally draining process for them, Ms. Albright explained. And I suspect that's part of their goal. They want to punish you, but we are not going to play their game. We will be calm, factual, and focused on one thing, and one thing only, the well-being of your son. Walking out of her office, I felt a renewed sense of resolve. They wanted a fight. Fine. They were going to get one, but I wasn't fighting them on their terms, with drama and emotion. I was fighting them on my terms, with truth and dignity. The legal process was as slow and tedious as Ms. Albright had predicted. There were motions and responses, affidavits and discovery requests. My parents' lawyer was a bulldog, a man who clearly specialised in aggressive, scorched-earth tactics. He tried to subpoena my work records, my therapy notes, anything he could find to paint me as an unfit mother. Ms. Albright shut it all down, batting away his ridiculous requests with cool legal precision. The guardian ad litem, a kind, thoughtful social worker named Mrs. Davis, was appointed by the court. She visited our home, interviewed me and Liam, and observed us with Oliver. She was thorough and professional, and I felt a sense of relief knowing that a neutral party was finally seeing the truth of our lives. She saw our sunny, toy-filled home. She saw Oliver, a happy, thriving, talkative 3-year-old who was securely attached to his parents. She saw the photo albums filled with pictures of him with his other grandparents, his aunts, his uncles, his cousins, a rich, full life, surrounded by people who loved him. Then, she went to interview my parents. I wasn't privy to what happened in that meeting, but I heard about the fallout later from my Aunt Carol, who, in a surprising turn of events, had called to apologise. She said my mother had lost it after the meeting with Mrs. Davis. She called me, sobbing. Carol said, her voice full of a weary resignation. She said the woman was cold and judgmental. She said she twisted her words. I knew what that meant. It meant that Mrs. Davis hadn't bought the performance. She hadn't been swayed by the tears or the dramatic pronouncements of love. She had seen through the facade. The court date was set. I was terrified. The idea of facing them in a courtroom, of having to listen to their lies under oath, made me physically ill. Liam was my rock. We'll just tell the truth, he said, over and over again. The truth is on our side. The day of the hearing, I wore a simple, professional dress. I felt like I was putting on armour. My parents were already there when we arrived, sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom. My father was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. My mother was dressed in a sombre navy blue suit, a string of pearls at her neck, the very picture of a respectable, grieving grandmother. She was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The performance was in full swing. Their lawyer presented their case first. He painted a picture of a loving, devoted family torn apart by a rebellious and unstable daughter. He talked about their desperate desire to know their only grandchild. He submitted photos of them from years ago, at my college graduation, at family holidays, trying to establish a history of a happy, close-knit family. When my mother took the stand, she was a master of melodrama. She cried, she wrung her hands. She spoke of her unbearable heartache. She told the judge that all she wanted was to bake cookies for her grandson and read him bedtime stories. It was a compelling performance, and for a terrifying moment, I wondered if the judge would believe it. Then it was our turn. Ms. Albright was calm, methodical, and devastatingly effective. She didn't resort to theatrics. She just presented the facts. She presented the threatening petition my father had written. She presented the cease and desist letter. She presented the screenshots of my mother's Facebook posts, where she had used stolen photos of my son to create a false narrative for her friends. The contrast between my mother's tearful testimony and the cold, hard evidence of her manipulative behaviour was stark. The final, and most powerful, piece of our case was the report from the guardian ad litem, Mrs. Davis. Ms. Albright called her to the stand. Mrs. Davis, in a calm, clear voice, read her recommendation to the court. She described our home as warm, stable, and child-focused. She described Oliver as a well-adjusted, happy, and securely bonded child. Then, she turned to my parents. She described their home as tense and filled with an atmosphere of grievance. She reported that when she asked them specific questions about Oliver, his interests, his personality, his favourite things, they couldn't answer. They didn't know him, they only knew the idea of him. She stated that their desire for visitation seemed to be more about their own emotional needs and perceived social standing than about the best interests of the child. And then, the final, brutal sentence. It is my professional recommendation that unsupervised visitation with the petitioners would be detrimental to the child's emotional well-being. I recommend that the petition be denied in its entirety. A gasp went through the courtroom. My mother let out a strangled sob. My father looked like he had been punched in the stomach. The judge, a woman with a kind but stern face, listened to the entire report without expression. When Mrs. Davis was finished, the judge looked at my parents. "Do you have anything to say in response to this report?" she asked. My father stood up, his face red with fury. "This is a travesty," he boomed. "This woman is biased. Our own daughter has poisoned everyone against us. We are good people. We are loving grandparents." The judge held up a hand, silencing him. She looked at them, her gaze unwavering, for a long, silent moment. "I have heard the testimony," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "I have reviewed the evidence, and I have read the report from the guardian ad litem, an officer of this court. It is clear to me that this petition is not, as you claim, about the best interests of the child. It is about control, and it is about a refusal to accept the consequences of your own actions." She paused, her eyes sweeping over my parents, then me. "The petition for grandparent visitation is denied. This court will not force a relationship where one does not, and should not, exist. We are adjourned." It was over, just like that. The gavel came down with a sharp, final crack. I felt a sob of my own, one of pure, unadulterated relief, escape my lips. Liam wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight as I shook. We had won. The truth had won. We left the courtroom without looking back. We didn't wait to see their reaction. We didn't need to. Their power was broken. Their last-ditch effort to control us had failed in the most public and humiliating way possible. The silence that followed this time was different. It wasn't the tense, waiting silence of before. It was a deep, settled, permanent peace. The war was truly over. We had won, and the terms of surrender were absolute. A few weeks after the court case, a large manila envelope arrived. It was from Ms. Albright. Inside was the final invoice for her services, which we paid gladly. It was the best money we had ever spent. Tucked in with the invoice was a small handwritten note. "Vanessa," it read, "it was a privilege to represent you. Go and enjoy your beautiful family. You've earned it. I taped the note to our fridge, a reminder of the battle we had fought and won. Life returned to its happy, normal rhythm, but something in me had changed. I walked taller. I felt a sense of ownership over my own life that was new and profound. I had faced the worst they could throw at me, and I had not only survived, I had thrived. I had protected my son, I had defended my family, and I had stood up for the truth. The story of my family's lawsuit became a kind of legend among our friends. It was a cautionary tale, a bizarre anecdote we'd share at dinner parties. It was so far removed from our current reality that it almost felt like it had happened to someone else. The final, strange postscript to the whole affair came about a year later. Liam and I were at a street festival in a different part of town. We were watching a local band, and Oliver was dancing on Liam's feet. I glanced over at a nearby craft booth, and my heart stopped. It was Chloe. She was sitting behind a table laden with lopsided, amateurish-looking jewellery, the same stuff she'd been making years ago. She was trying to sell it. She looked tired, and the forced, bright smile she was giving potential customers didn't reach her eyes. Our eyes met for a brief second across the crowd. There was no recognition in hers, or if there was, she didn't show it. I was just another face in the crowd. I turned away, a wave of pity washing over me. Not the guilt-ridden pity of the past, but a genuine, detached sadness. She was still stuck. Still trying to sell a fantasy. Still waiting for the world to recognize her brand. She was almost 40 years old. Still playing the part of the free-spirited artist that had been assigned to her as a child. I looked at Liam, laughing as he spun our son around. I looked at our life, the one we had built with intention and hard work, a life based on reality, not fantasy, and I felt a surge of gratitude so intense it almost brought me to my knees. I had gotten out. I had escaped the roles, the scripts, the whole dysfunctional production. I was writing my own story now, and it was a love story. Today, our life is wonderfully, beautifully ordinary. Oliver is a whirlwind of energy and questions, a happy, confident kid who knows he is loved unconditionally. Our home is a place of peace, a sanctuary from the storms of the world. We are expecting our second child, a daughter, in a few months. When we announced this pregnancy to our friends and Liam's family, the response was exactly what it should be. Pure, uncomplicated joy. There were hugs, happy tears, and offers to babysit. There was no calculation, no hidden agenda, no talk of free rides, just love. I don't know what happened to my parents. After the court case, they seemed to vanish. I assume they are still living in their condo, two bitter, lonely people in a world of their own making. I hope, for their own sakes, that they have found some kind of peace, but it's not my responsibility to help them find it. My responsibility is to my own family, to the little world we have built. My responsibility is to make sure my children grow up knowing that love is not a transaction, that family is not a weapon, and that strong doesn't mean you have to carry everyone else's burdens. It means being strong enough to put them down. Sometimes I think about that day at the BBQ, the moment that shattered my world and then rebuilt it into something better. My mother's words, meant to be a cruel, final blow, turned out to be a gift. The free ride is officially over, she'd said. She was right. The ride of me carrying them, of me sacrificing my own happiness for theirs, was over. And my own ride, the one towards a life of my own choosing, was just beginning. It's been a long and difficult journey, but I wouldn't change a thing. I found my voice, I found my strength, and I found what family really means. It's not about blood. It's about who you choose to love, and who chooses to love you back, with honesty, respect, and a whole heart. So, I'll ask you what I sometimes ask myself. Did I go too far, or did I not go far enough? Let me know what you think.